Hello, humans. In this video, real quick, I want to talk about Rockefeller medicine men and how in this book, what he talks about is the history of the creation of the medical trust, how it exists still today with Gates, who's a relative of Rockefeller, and just sort of some of the stuff in the first chapter that explains to you some of the stuff that went on that Rockefeller and other industrialists did. So what Rockefeller did was he got together with his cousin at the time, Frederick Gates, who was related, they were related to each other through Nelson Rockefeller, who happened to be, I think, vice president in the late 1800s or early 1900s. So what Rockefeller did was he created a trust. Well, first he used the Civil War to make a bunch of money shipping products using free shipping from the railroads that Lincoln had taken over. And so Rockefeller was able to shift his products into the South for free or very little cost, which made him enough money to buy Standard Oil, which made him enough money to create a trust, a medical trust, which then he was able to take over or create a new type of medical industry. So he didn't take over holistic care. He basically created big pharma and the medical industry the way it is today. And this trust still exists today, and it's ran by Gates. And we have Bill Gates now, whereas in Rockefeller's day in the 1800s, it was Friedrich Gates. So again, this is Rockefeller Medicine Men. I'm going to probably put this online. This is a Forgotten Books by, looks like F. Richard Brown or C. Richard Brown. And it's a little bit thick, but it's really good. And I think that anyone, or E. Richard Brown, I think anyone who wants to know about what's going on today and how it happened, you can read this book. So what Rockefeller did was he used the money he made during the Civil War and his oil industry that he took over. He made so much money during the Civil War that he was able to use that money to take over basically the political system and to pay the colleges and universities to institute his ideas on licenses and control mechanisms so that there wouldn't be too many doctors out in the world. And this way, when he kept the number of doctors low and required them to get all kinds of licenses and stuff, he was able to control how much money they could make. So if there's more doctors, they charge less and more people will be able to go to the doctor. Whereas if there's fewer doctors in an area, they can charge more because there's less competition. So he made a lot of money in his quote unquote trust. And then he used government and uses still today government to push his trust out there as if it were a requirement for people to utilize government institutions. So like the FDA and CDC and some of these other places, they pretend to have the force of law, and they don't. They're just social institutions promoted by the federal government, which really they have no authority at all because the people never gave authority to them. That's why everything that you sign with them is just a contract. They use federal forms to contract with people, and then they switch from what appears to be a federal office using federal forms to something outside of the federal government, a social instrumentality, or an instrumentality used for social purposes, which is not within the confines of the Constitution. So I'm just going to read through some important stuff here in this book, and then I'll give you a link to the book. So in the introduction, he says corporate class institutions instituted that medicine serve the needs of their corporate capitalist society. So what he's saying is that they wanted to use the government to institute their corporations that appear to be philanthropic, but in reality was just them using government to increase their business, their corporations. And banks use corporations, and corporations use banks, and they work together to help each other grow. And basically they use government to do it, and it's a monopoly. So this chapter 1 says wholesale philanthropy, from charities to social transformation. And it's all just a trick to get people to accept it. The words they use are just tricks to get people to accept that they're doing this for benevolent purposes, which really they aren't. The Union of Corporate Philanthropy, the managerial professional stratum, and the universities and science spawned the Rockefeller medicine men and their new system of medicine. So this was outside of holistic medicine. This was a new system of medicine. I had read something in a different book that was talking about how people were developing diabetes at a very fast pace in the late 1800s. And there was a doctor that found out basically that a ketogenic diet would cure diabetes. But people, instead of going with a diet, they decided they'll just take medicine. They'll just take a pill. And this pill was a different type of medicine. This is what Rockefeller medicine is about. This is what the big farm is about, as opposed to just eating healthier foods and making better choices. And Rockefeller could see right away that he could potentially make a whole lot of money if he took over this new medical industry, which is exactly what he and Gates did. So the Civil War was watershed in American philanthropy, as it was in nearly all aspects of American life. It was a great wrenching experience in American history, spreading death and destruction, stimulating industrial development, and producing upheavals within and between all classes of America. I have another book here. It's by Thomas DiLorenzo called The Problem with Lincoln. Lincoln was, and Rockefeller Medicine Men mentions it also, Lincoln was originally an attorney for the railroads. And so the Civil War, if you actually look at the evidence and the debates in Congress, you'll see that the Civil War really didn't have anything to do with freeing the blacks, even though I don't believe in slavery or anything like that, and that making people slaves is wrong. Basically, Lincoln just enslaved everyone because he removed state sovereignty and placed everyone in under the federal constitution, which originally, if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll see that I explained to you that states were sovereign. So states created the federal government, which is something Andrew Napolitano says all the time, not the other way around. So the Civil War was used by the businessmen to take over the land in the South, which is what Thomas DiLorenzo explains a lot of in here. And then they used Lincoln. They put these corporations used Lincoln, put him in office, and had him take over the South by basically decimating all the farms and the homes and killing all their cattle. And he was able to do this using the militia and the military officers that he installed to reign over the militia. So here he says, the Civil War and railroads led some men to their pots of gold. Andrew Carnegie began his rise to fortune as a telegraph clerk for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1853. By the beginning of the Civil War, the ambitious 25-year-old Carnegie was well into railroad management and spent a few months organizing rail transport and telegraph communications for the War Department. But Carnegie quit his exciting and dangerous warfront job and returned to the Pennsy and especially to tend his growing investment in iron manufacturing and coal mining. By 1863, his annual income exceeded $40,000. So that's in 1863. John Davis and Rockefeller fortunes were also helped by the Civil War in 1861, as the war consumed the energies and lives of Northerners and Southerners. The 25-year-old Rockefeller was building successful merchandising firm in Cleveland. As war orders poured in, commodity prices rose sharply and Rockefeller's profits soared. 2 years later, Rockefeller had saved enough capital to invest in an oil refining business, and by the end of the war, he was worth enough to take control of the company. By 1880, led by Rockefeller's determination to make money and still more money, combined with relentless competition in the marketplace and rebates extracted from the railroads, his Standard Oil Company was refining 95% of the country's oil. Okay, so he used the Civil War, and he made a bunch of money. He made enough money to buy Standard Oil. Once he did that, he started buying out all the other oil companies in the area. He even bought out all the houses in down this one street where was all the rich people lived. So he bought all the houses. So after he bought their companies, he bought their homes. The Civil War has been called the first railroad war, yet the war did not rely on an industrial economy. As William Appleman Williams aptly put it, the Civil War produced an industrial system rather than being fought for one. The ultimate victors of the war were the corporations and the men who, for the most part, ruled the new economy. Exploitation of workers, unmitigated by either legal restraints or humanitarianism, led to increased organizing by labor. So they didn't do it because they wanted to help people. They exploited people. They exploited the federal government because it says unmitigated by either legal constraints or humanitarianism. They didn't care about people, and they used the federal government to make sure that they had some pretended power. And it talks in here a little bit about how Rockefeller manipulated people to get what he wanted. He would lie, he would start rumors, he would do all sorts of underhanded evil things that good people don't do in order to get what he wanted. And taking over government and instituting his social policies was one of them. So the times are strangely out of joint, worried a Kentucky politician. The rich grow richer, the poor become poorer, the nation trembles. Okay, and now look at where we're at. They're just locking people in their houses over, getting something injected into their bodies. The best philanthropy, the help that does the most good and the least harm, the help that nourishes civilization is civilization at its very root, that most widely disseminates health, righteousness, and happiness, is not what is usually called charity. So, giving you a free thing in your body that you don't want is not charity. And locking you in your house is not charity. But that's how all of this medical industry started out. It started out, as, well, we're just trying to help people. It is, in my judgment, the investment of effort or time or money carefully considered with relation to the power of employing people at a remunerative wage to expand and develop the resources at hand, and to give opportunity for progress and healthful labor where it did not exist before. No mere money giving is comparable to this in its least and beneficial results. It's interesting how in The Problem with Lincoln, DiLorenzo talks about how Lincoln was able to get the military from the North to basically go and attack the South. I mean, they killed husbands and wives. They burned down their houses. They burned down their cities. They bombed their cities. They killed all their livestock, even their pets, and stole all of their furnishings and dresses and all that kind of stuff. They did all this to their own detriment, because a lot of the stuff that the North needed, such as cotton, came from the South. So they did this stuff just because somebody told them to go do it. And it seemed like they had some sort of justification for it. Oh, slavery. So it seems like that's what they're saying here, that they're saying that they can get people to attack and do bad things to other people if they just make it seem like it's for a good reason. Even if, it makes no sense, because a lot of people, they won't stop and think about what they're being told to do. They just do it. It's a good reason. Okay, then they'll go do it. The corporatists made up a lot of different organizations that they used the government to try to force people into being a part of. So to get a license to be a doctor is not something that's been around for a long time and throughout history. This is something new that came about with corporatization and progressivism in the United States, and perpetuated by the Rockefeller Medical Trust. So these colleges and universities didn't used to require a license in the United States or from the United States for someone to be a doctor. You got your degree, you traveled around with another doctor and learned a bunch of stuff, and then you went out and you moved to a town where there wasn't a doctor, and you did your doctor work there, and you helped people. There was no license. But when Rockefeller took over, he was able to make a whole bunch of money by requiring people to get all these licenses. And then he used the federal government, the long arm of the federal government, to get people to do it. And I can show you the difference between what's an actual constitutional law and what's not a constitutional law on a website, a government website. So you can see the difference between a social system that requires your consent, that appears to be law, that's actually not. And you can see the difference between those and what is an actual law. So here it says, the progressive movement proved an ideal vehicle for the business class to assert its interest by securing additional needful capital from the Congress, and through reforms in the federal executive branch, creating and controlling regulatory agencies to bring order and consolidation to a number of industries. The politically wise leaders of this class thus demonstrated, with the strategic alliance with social reformers and conservative union officials, the nation's political institutions could be reformed to serve the needs of the corporate order. That's basically what I just told you. So let's find the website. And I will show you the difference between the corporate people's desire to control using the federal government, and my computer's just here. I already have it up here. And the federal government's actual constitutional laws, because they're different. So if you look, there's Title I, General Provisions, Title II, the Congress. Now, if you can see there's a difference between this, where there's an asterisk, no asterisks, asterisks, no asterisks, no asterisks, no, I'm sorry, these have asterisks, these do not. Okay, so here you have a law. This is not a law. This is a corporate social organization pretending to be a law. Okay, so domestic security is pretending to be a law. It's not a law. It's pretending to be a law. It's some sort of construct put together by the corporations, progressivisms, to make people, to use federal government to make people believe that something's a law when it's not a law. Okay, and it goes on down. So you get to Title 12, banks and banking is not a law. Commerce and trade is not a law. Now, people will say, but commerce is in the Constitution. You're right, it's in the Constitution. But all this stuff, Title 15, commerce and trade, it's not a law. The way they write it, the way they do it, the way they enforce it, it's not a law. You have to agree to it, meaning you have to sign something. You have to do some certain kind of thing. You have to agree to be in some place where you're actually not. Customs and duty, education, food and drug, that's the FDA. See Title 21, it's never been passed into law. Foreign relations and intercourse, but if you don't agree to it and you don't sign their papers, they come after you. Hospitals and asylums, Indians, Internal Revenue Code, Title 26 is not a law. Intoxicating liquors. There's no requirement for anyone to pay federal taxes. There's no requirement for anyone to get a license to sell liquor, unless you claim that you're under their jurisdiction, under their authority, their pretended authority. Okay, so perhaps Rockefeller suspected such betrayals from politicians who had their own visions of what was good for business, for he customarily reserved his political contributions for candidates closer to the standards' immediate fields of operations. So he's saying right here that Rockefeller would support people who supported him. So he would support politicians and helped politicians get into office if he had some sort of agreement with them where they agreed to help him. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. People think that conspiracies are theories. Most conspiracies are not theories at all. It's just business. Okay, prevention involved intervening in the lives of both groups to assist them with their misfortune or change their bad habits to lead them into the path of righteousness. But this new professional class believed that medical and social intervention could remedy natural imperfections. So they wanted to change people. They wanted to get control of certain people in societies and change them. Some of these capitalists, particularly in the first half of the 19th century, helped to create compulsory public schooling to socialize working class and poor children to the rhythms and corporate needs of factory work, and to give them the rudimentary skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, and vocational skills needed in an industrial society. So basically, to take over the education system using a social construct through the federal government to force people into an educational system controlled by the corporations to make sure that they have a certain type of workforce. That's the game. It's not a conspiracy. It's all right here. These educational philanthropists were primarily capitalists who disdained the aristocratic pretenses of gentlemen farmers and the dabblers of merchants, ignorance of technique. So they wanted control. They just want control. They want to control everything because that way they can make sure that they stay in control. If they gain control through the education system, through your food and drugs, make you pay taxes, make you get licenses for everything, they can control everything. And they'll stay in control, banks and banking. You got to use their banks. You got to pay interest. You got to pay fees, everything. Not surprisingly, it was the philanthropies created by the kings of oil and steel that started American schooling down the same road to vertical organization and centralized control that they had created in their own industries. Again, social construct, not a law. Social construct forced on us through the federal government. A pretend authority. They don't have authority. They don't, because it's never been passed into law, because Congress can't pass these titles into laws because they don't have the authority to. So they make it look like laws, tell you it's a law, tell you you have to comply. And once you sign the papers, they got you. And it's nothing more than a bait and switch, because they're baiting you by telling you it's a law, making you sign the forms, or deceiving you into thinking that you have to sign the forms, which is fraud. And then once you sign the form, it's a law for you. Speaking to a receptive audience among the haves, more than the truculent have-nots, Carnegie identified the accumulation of wealth as the essential factor in the progress of the race. So one of the reasons why Lincoln wanted to take over the South was so that the railroad companies can get a hold of the land that the farms were on. They can build their railroads in the South and on into the West. Now, one of the things that Thomas DiLorenzo talks about in this book is how Lincoln wanted to buy one of the islands, Puerto Rico, I think, to send all the black people there, because Lincoln didn't like black people. He wanted them gone. And that way, white people, white businessmen could take over the entire country and build all their businesses and create wealth. The wealthy capitalist is thus a mere trustee, an agent for his poorer brethren, bringing to their service his superior wisdom, experience, and ability to administer, in a word, doing for them what they would or could do, or better for doing for them better than they would or could do for themselves, which I, of course, wrote BS here. You're not ever, I mean, since we've been born, we haven't been given a chance to do for ourselves, because they push all these fake laws on us. Now, I don't know about you, but I buy an appliance nowadays. I bought a Bosch dishwasher, my husband did. We paid almost $1,000 for it, and with 6 months it was broke. And we just had a freezer go out. We had to run and buy a new one before all the meat went bad. He bought a Dodge Ram, paid a big diesel truck, a whole bunch of money for it, and all it's done is broken down. Just constantly. It's not even paid off yet, and it's just breaking down and breaking down and breaking. It's a diesel. These cars aren't supposed to break down. Rockefeller, the richest Baptist in the world. So to get more stuff, we have to constantly put things on the credit card. How are we going to get out of debt? You know, if we're constantly having to get into debt to just try to keep what we have going. It's just a scam. It's all a scam. And look now, people are getting locked in their houses because they didn't participate in a voluntary social construct. If you don't participate, you can't even go out of your house now. Hospitals and asylums, it's not a law. Internal revenue, not a law. Intoxicating liquor, it's not a law. These are just social constructs created by corporations and then used by the government to push it on us using federal forms. A bait and switch. They tell you, well, it's a federal form, you have to sign it. And then you think, okay, well, I guess I got to sign it. And then you sign it, and then you're hooked. They got their hook in you. By 1893, he had accumulated, besides the Standard, 67 major investments valued at $23 million in railroads, mining, and manufacturing, and banks. It occurred to me, Rockefeller later recalled, that Mr. Gates, who had a great store of common sense, though no especial technical information about factories and mills, might aid me in securing some first-hand information as to how these concerns are actually prospering. He asked Gates to investigate some of these investments when he happened to be in the area of education, society, business. Gates checked on several of Rockefeller's distant stakes, an immense land speculation scheme in the Pacific Northwest that two fellow parishioners of Rockefeller's Fifth Avenue Baptist Church had persuaded the oil baron to invest in a $600,000 investment in a West Superior, Wisconsin steel mill and land speculation fraud recommended by the same brethren, and a smaller iron furnace in Alabama. Gates demonstrated his varied abilities and singular value to his employer. His report was a model of what such a report should be, Rockefeller remarked with uncharacteristic praise. It stated the facts, and in this case, they were almost all unfavorable. One investment that Rockefeller thought was earning $1,000 a day instead was losing that amount. Okay, so Gates and Rockefeller became cousins through Nelson Rockefeller, who was vice president. And I don't remember the year. It was like late 1800s or early 1900s. And here he's saying that one of the churches, the Fifth Avenue Baptist Church, had persuaded Rockefeller to buy some land and make some investments, and they were bad investments. So what he did was he hired Gates to go and investigate these things, and he ended up losing money. So it's all about making money. It's not about charity. It's all about making money. That's all he cared about. In 1916, Gates began converting all his investments into then rising and profitable bank stocks and encouraged Rockefeller to do the same, recommending especially the Chase National Bank, which was paying dividends of 20% on invested capital. Though Gates was involved in Rockefeller's finances in important ways, his organization of Rockefeller's philanthropies, and especially the medical programs, makes him historically significant. And who runs the trust now? Gates, who happens to have a whole lot of contracts with the military, including providing for their software, computer software programs, and probably a lot we don't know about. The programs and strategies that emerged from this center of financial power had an enormous impact, especially on medical care and health systems in the United States and throughout the world. Having acquired the fortune, it fell to Rockefeller and his associates to maintain it as a trust for the people, just as Carnegie had advocated. It is the duty of men of means, Rockefeller wrote early in this century, to maintain the title to their property and to administer their funds until some man or some body of men shall rise up capable of administering for the general good the capital of the country better than they can. So he's saying he wants to run your life because you can't do it. And even if you could do it, you can't. You still have to get some other men to do it. Let's see. Sears was succeeded by Jabez L. M. Curry, a Confederate politician and planter from Alabama, who had saved his land from confiscation after the Civil War by swearing allegiance to the United States. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was a guest at the third conference. In 1901, Robert C. Ogden, a partner of John Wanamaker and general manager of their New York department store, chartered a special train dubbed the Millionaire Special by hostile Southern newspapers to bring Northern business on a tour of Southern black schools and then to a conference with Southern activists in the cause. Okay, and what did they do? They took over the schools. Where's education? They took over the schools. It's a social construct. It's not a law. Curry, former Confederate officer and now chief of staff of the Southern campaign, brazenly proclaimed, "This white supremacy does not mean hostility to the Negro, but friendship for him." Oh, by taking over education and making us all stupid? Nice. Making sure that we stayed good employees. In January 1902, they outlined a munificent philanthropic enterprise, education and training for its children of both races. So they didn't care, black or white, as long as you stayed stupid. While general education board development, another thing controlled by a group of men, other programs over the next several decades, medical ones prominently among them, their work in the South remained important and never deviated substantially from their original perspective. The board believed the Negro must be educated and trained. College training would be provided for carefully selected people. I don't want to say it because they'll probably get blocked. Who will lead the race in its effort to educate and improve itself. The Blacks' leaders must be trained so that, looking to them for guidance as he does, he may be as well guided as possible. The GEB, General Education Board, was not concerned only with education of Blacks. It worked to build up high schools for whites and for Blacks throughout the South because, they had went through and just decimated the whole thing. They didn't really need to do that, but that was one of the things that they were able to do after they burned everything down. Always with an eye to creating local responsibility for self-help, what Gates called the foundation of character and social life itself. So constructing society in the way that he felt it should be. The main function of this professor was not to teach, but to organize. 2,000 new high schools built in that period at a cost of $60 million. That's how much he wanted to control everything. It would be worth it in the long run for him because he would have control. Gates then suggested several funds for different areas of work, a great fund for the promotion of a system of higher education in the United States, to which they control, of course. And they do. Look at all this idiots they're putting out into society these days. A fund for the promotion of medical research throughout the world, a fund for the promotion of the fine arts, and more. These funds should be so large that to become a trustee of one of them is to make a man at once a public character. Okay, Bill Gates. The work of these enterprises should employ the best talent of the entire human race. And then we have a Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, Rockefeller Foundation, Henry Demarest Lloyd in Wealth Against Commonwealth, published in 1894, the Ida Tarbell in a magazine series ending in 1904, and tarred and feathered the Standard Oil Trust. The socialist movement was winning the support of working people throughout the country for its program to do away with private capital altogether. And perhaps most frightening of all, upstanding middle-class Americans, professionals and businessmen with values very much like the Rockefellers themselves, were joining the call for progressive reforms. The progressive movement, while firmly supporting capitalism, was called for constraints on the accumulation and concentration of private wealth. Rockefeller was elected in 1904 on a platform that Roosevelt was elected in 1904 on a platform that at least threatened to break up monopolies. Of course, we know they didn't. The last major area to which skilled management was directed were the social services, charity and social welfare programs, philanthropic foundations, and medicine. Let's see. But running a corporation is different from running a corporate society, and though they understood the need to take more control over social institutions, they did not understand how. Others like Gates and John D. Rockefeller Jr. conceived of a more strategic role for philanthropy, the transformation of social institutions. They worked to make the nation's colleges and universities into a system that would be more efficiently yield technically trained and properly socialized professionals and managers for the system. They developed new roles for professionals as managers, and they helped rationalize the institutions in which these professionals work. So more control. Armed with the crucial social philosophy, he set forth to civilize the lower classes and set a model of responsibility for upper echelons of society. The society he hoped to preserve was one based explicitly on enormous disparities of wealth. And I guess it's not just disparaging enough. They've got to now eliminate the middle class. Neither state colleges nor those controlled by religious dominations were eligible. Finally, to be eligible, a school had to require of its students a prescribed minimum of high school preparation prior to administration. This last requirement proved a successful attempt by the foundation to throw its influence in favor of a differentiation between the secondary school and the college, in order to create a system of schools intelligently related to each other and to the ambitions and needs of a democracy. Although only 52 of the original 421 applicants were eligible for the pension plan, other schools soon modeled themselves on the Carnegie system to make themselves eligible. So competition between colleges and universities to get that money. And with that money came the social system. You have to comply with these things. Title 20, teach banks and banking, teach commerce and trade, teach people that the laws are the laws and they can't get around them and they can't fight them. But don't teach what a positive law is and what a non-positive law is. Don't teach what the Constitution actually says. Soon, virtually every high school and college in the country measured student progress in Carnegie units. A national system of education was taking shape with the prodding of Carnegie pensions and the Carnegie Foundation as the unofficial accrediting body. Rockefeller was fortunate to find a man like Gates to develop wholesale philanthropy for him. So selling philanthropy to the people to gain support. 1914 massacre of striking miners and their wives and children at a Ludlow, Colorado mining company controlled by the Rockefellers. Jr. was held largely responsible for public opinion throughout the nation. So what they do is they say things and do things to make it seem like you can trust them, but on the backside of it, they're doing things to support themselves and stay in control. If they didn't want to stay in control, they wouldn't tell you that all these things they're doing is the law and that you have to comply with it. They wouldn't need to. If everything was so great and wonderful and really for your benefit, they wouldn't need to do that. You would just do it because it would be good for you. But it's not good for us, so they have to do the bait and switch and tell us we have to sign the forms, and then after we sign the forms, we're screwed. Because they're contracts. And once you sign a contract, the contract becomes the law between you and that person. So with Gates, these problems did not arise because his carefully developed and forcefully presented proposals won immediate support. Gates never expected the trustees to play an important role in social innovation. When a trustee suggested that GEB, that's the General Education Board, members were appointed to throw new light on the great problem of education in this country, Gates impatiently explained that he and Rockefeller gave an overwhelming preponderance to businessmen in composing the board to fix the policies of this board along the lines of successful experience. They knew, he said, that successful businessmen would steer the ship along traditional lines and would not be carried out of their course by any temporary breeze or even by hurricanes of sentiment. So to keep the ship moving in the direction that the original planners of these trusts wanted it to go in, these social constructors, they wanted the ship to go in a certain direction, and to keep it in that direction, they wanted to make sure that the future generations were educated in a way where this was the only thing they would see. And so now when we go and we try to tell people that the Constitution doesn't say what they think it says, they don't understand. They can't get it. They don't know. When I tell people that banking is not a law, that conservation, commerce and trade, none of these are laws. They're not positive. They don't have a positive law citation. Education is not a law. Food and drug is, people don't understand. They just don't. Secure general public approval and active and powerful public cooperation. As long as you cooperate, they don't have a problem. As long as you sign the forms, they don't have a problem. As long as you do what you're told, they don't have a problem. By 1928, the General Education Board had contributed some $50 million to medical schools for very specific reforms, generating total resources estimated at 10 times that amount for those same reforms. So they give money to these colleges and universities to do what they want them to do. And getting a license to practice medicine is one of them. The thrust of their programs was to systematize and rationalize these institutions to make them better serve the needs of corporate capitalism. They only cared about themselves. They only care that you're dumb and that you stay educated in their education system and don't think for yourself. Colleges and universities became the training and research agencies, producing knowledge and reproducing engineers, scientists, lawyers, teachers, and other technicians and social managers. Managers were well paid for their efforts, and some, like Gates, were incorporated into the highest circles of the owning class. So the class that owns everything, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? Because they want everything not belonging to government. They want it to belong to their trust. Their thing is to own the world and everything in it and everyone in it because they want to run it the way they think is best. Broad social transformations, however, require the participation of more than the ruling class. While the working class suffered greatly from the capitalist reorganization of production, some groups attached themselves to the ascending corporate class and benefited greatly. New occupations like engineering and social work and old ones like law and medicine gained elevated professional status in return for becoming the new order's managers of production or social relations. Medicine's almost fantastic transformation from rank ignominy to Olympian heights of status exemplifies the powerful consequences of an interest group adapting itself to the needs of the dominant class. Okay, so this is all progressivism and corporatism taking over the federal government and using the pretend force that the federal government has to get people to agree by contract, and those contracts are written on federal forms, okay, and then switching to an instrumentality, making you believe that you are just simply being a good person following the laws, when in actuality, you're agreeing to be a part of a social construct, which is not really there for your benefit, but to increase the wealth of corporations. And this is the progressive thing. So back in ancient times, it was the Catholic Church that wanted to take over the world. And today it's the progressives and the corporations. Now, I'm not against capitalism. I'm for free market capitalism. What we have in this country is not free market capitalism. It's an organized group of people who use the federal government to take over the education system, the banks, the commerce and trade, and to force things down your throat, which only increases their power. Okay? So this is Rockefeller Medicine Men that I showed you, and The Problem with Lincoln by Thomas DiLorenzo. And this one you can get from Amazon. And this one you'll have to get from one of the websites, the free websites. And I'm going to post a link to this book so that you can read it if you choose to. And it's a really good book and it explains a lot. And I highly encourage you to read this book. Now, if you haven't seen some of my other videos, I use this website all the time. This is called Office of the Law Revision Council, United States Code, uscode.house.gov. Just because something's a code doesn't mean it's a law. Code just simply means book. In the old days, in ancient times, it was called codex. So you had Justinian's Codex. Code is the English word for codex. And not all of the codes called titles are laws. In order to be a law, it has to have a positive law citation, and it has to have it up front for the entire title to be considered a law. Now, if it is in the middle or in the end, it's not a law for the entire title. It's only a law for that section. You have to be careful when you look at this stuff because, for example, they claim Title 23 highways is a law, but when you click on it and you go in and you search for the positive law citation, you can't find it. There isn't one. This is what gives them the social right by contract to give you tickets and stop you on the highways. Now, the Constitution is the highest law, so in order for them to be able to do this, you have to in some way agree individually yourself with your own signature. Okay, and some people have said, well, they're not contracts because they have to be signed by, contracts have to be signed by both parties. Okay, then it's just a bait and switch using federal forms. However they're doing it, it's not in accordance with the science of law or philosophies of law or the maxims of law or contract law. It's all by deceit and fraud. Okay, so that's the video for this topic. And if you have any questions or comments, please post in the comment section. And I'm going to post a link to the book, Rockefeller Medicine Men.